So, welcome everyone to a live session. It's part of the interactive virtual craft fair taking place between Tuesday the 23rd and Sunday the 28th of March 2021. This is a really exciting live session, and we're joined by Cassandra Sabo Designs, a wonderful weaver who's joining us straight from her studio. Now, this is an interactive chat, so please do hover. You'll see that there's a chat box. Please do click on the chat box, that will open, and then you can pop your questions straight to Cassandra, and then I can interject and ask. Now, we join Cassandra from her studio, so I'm going to go straight in and bring her in to say hello. So hello, Cassandra, how are you?
Hi, Alice. I'm great. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Very well. Oh, it's lovely. Now I see we're joined in a very, very full studio. I can see lots of colour. That's very reminiscent of your work. So I'm going to go straight in. Okay, Cassandra, what is your professional background? What kind of brought you and has inspired you to make and produce, the work that we're seeing today?
So I'm a trained weaver. I studied textile design and graduated almost 10 years ago from St. Martin's. So my background is as a weaver. I also studied engineering and in another life, I like to say. So I think weaving basically is an extension of that curiosity of how things work and creating structures that you can, experiment with and try and push the boundaries and explore with.
So what are we going to be having a look at today with you?
So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about weaving with waste fibers. When I started 4 years ago working with wool roving, and if you're not familiar with wool roving, it's this wonderful, lovely, soft wool. You probably see it on Instagram and Pinterest everywhere now, in wall hangings, etc. And I started working with it about 4 years ago to create hand-woven throws. And in the process of creating hand-woven throws, I had to learn and develop ways and techniques of creating a more sustainable, long-lasting product. Wool roving is actually really quite a beautiful fiber. It's actually a fiber that it's before it's in its spun state. So if you peel off a small amount, it's actually quite fibrous and quite unstable and not very secure. So when you want to create a product that you've invested lots of time and energy and a client's going to pay you for, you want to make sure that it's rugged and it's sustainable over a long period of time. And in order to do that, I had to explore different ways of working with this fiber. And the first one was actually understanding a bit more about the felting process and also how you prepare your fibers with spinning. So these are two skills that I had no idea anything about until I found out about and discovered wool roving. And I had to use hand carders to start off with, because when you're weaving and you're working with 20-meter long lengths, so for example, I've got these throws here. I'm trying to find one that won't fall off the if you look and see one of these throws, this is 1 meter wide in width. And to get a continuous length, I often weave with 20 meters at a time. So you don't have all these overlaps that create an unstable and not necessarily pretty solution for the product. So I ended up having to work with a hand carder to smooth out the edges. So sometimes when I would work, I would overlap two ends. If I get another piece here, I would overlap two ends on top of each other. And if you can imagine when these are compressed, that actually you can see that join. You don't want to see that really as for a quality product. So I explored a bit further and discovered something that millions of others already knew about. So it was new to me, but was using a hand carder to simply break out the fibers in a much more natural way to actually get a gradient. So you can see, if you can imagine, you have two ends. I'll grab the other end of this one. And I'll do the same again. So this is what the current end looks like. So overlapping these two ends wouldn't work very nice. But if I use the hand cutter again and I smooth it out over a period of time, you get a much more natural end that then when it's woven back together, you don't see the join. And so that started 4 years ago. And I started to accumulate lots of little bits of these fuzzies. In fact, 4 years later, I think I accumulated 3 or 4 bags, black bin liners filled with different fibers of all sorts of different colors. And that was creating a problem, both because I didn't have the room in my studio to store it anymore, but also because what do I do with all this yarn, this material that is just sitting there ready to be used for something else? And of course, hand weaving is a slow process, and you really need to find ways to cut corners and work quickly. And I didn't have the time then to explore all the different areas that would come with learning to work with this fiber. And eventually worked out that I needed to spend some dedicated time on it. I bought a spinning wheel 2 years ago. And actually it's 2.5, almost, no, it's 3 years ago now. I've just lost a year during lockdown. And I started spinning. My first attempts were terrible, and I really didn't like working with it because I couldn't get the results I wanted. But in lockdown this year, I finally had another go, probably the 4th or 5th time. I had 15-minute snaps between teaching kids during the homeschooling, and I really developed. So I was just saying that I've got different colors of fibers that I wanted to blend together. So I get all these little offcuts, and I find the colors that I like best that might work together. And if I get a little bit closer, there, I would take these fibers and I would simply lay them out on what we call a blending board. So you probably have seen this many times online, or maybe you haven't. And it's a way of distributing the fibers over these little fine, they're almost like little needles. And they basically just split the fibers along the length of them. You might take another bit here. You might layer it on top, and then you get this really wonderful mix of different colors within your yarn. Then you take I use a little scrub brush and just brush that down so that you can secure the fibers. And we're doing a very quick version here today. Got my little chopstick here, and then I'm just going to very quickly peel it off. You can do this in different ways, but for speed today. Can you see now that we have a much different type of fiber that is actually spread out? And if you get ready to spin it, you are starting to get a blended yarn. So this is actually very solid and thick, chunky yarn. But for my different types of yarns, I've actually worked out over time now which yarns I like creating and working with best. Now, most of my yarns that I've worked with before are commercially spun yarns, and they're much finer. And I like working at creating the thick and the thin and mixing it up together. But with the spinning, I actually really enjoyed creating different types of yarns. And so here is a lovely chunky one. This is more of a boucle yarn, which then has all the same colors that I've just shown you, spun together to create these little spirals. And so this has to be one of my favorite yarns to work with and to spin to create new products. And when it came to actually using these materials, I wanted to find, I don't have a huge amount. I know this looks like quite a lot, but actually when you're weaving, it can be used up quite quickly. And so what I started to do is to work in smaller shapes where I could combine my hand spun yarns with some of my commercial yarns in a much smaller quantity. So I've got some hand spun in here. These are hand dyed yarns. So some of the other fibers that were neutral colors, I also spent quite a lot of time hand dyeing during lockdown. So I've got a number of different types of roving, but now much thicker and felted in nice soft colorways. And I've got lots of other different ones. So that's a whole other element to my waste yarns. It's hand dyeing them. But for today, we'll keep things simple. I'll show you another piece of artwork that I've got here that will maybe demonstrate the hand spun yarns. So this one here, actually, if you can see, this is one of the ones where I started to use a lot more of my hand spun yarns, and you can just make them out here and they give you this really lovely 3D texture. So that's something that I'm starting to move more in that direction, because now I actually have the materials ready. It's really a question It's now really a question of making sure that now my sustainable practice moves in that direction long term. This is not a short term sort of element of my practice.
Talking about sustainability, how important, is that for you? Do you have any kind of challenges, within your business, to make it sustainable?
Absolutely. Like any small business, I think the challenge with sustainability is often the cost. So I work primarily with natural materials. Most of the yarns that I have are cotton. I would say most of it is wool, really, with supporting yarns like the cotton. But sometimes for my lampshades, so for example, I've got one here. I've got a lampshade, and in order to get the camera there, so that rainbow lampshade, when lit, is actually using monofilament. So monofilament is not a natural fiber, but in all honesty, I'm a small independent designer. I don't create volume. The products that I create, they're not mass produced. They're one-offs, one of a kinds. And so although I have this ethos, which is using up my waste materials, and that's actually as much from a childhood background of my parents saying, eat everything on your plate and, use up all the craft materials so there's nothing left, so you're not wasting anything. I also think it's good for the planet, and any little step I can make as a designer, I think it's important. But I also am realistic that I can't do everything, in order to move myself forward with, again, a smaller budget and without the power of being a big business.
Now, I'm glad you've touched upon it, because it is something certainly within the craft and design world, it's very prominent. And of course, it's not just going to affect now, it's going to affect, the future. But talking about the future, obviously I can see there's lots of colour behind you. And I know that later on the weekend, I'm going to jump straight into it. You are doing a workshop. So what can we expect, from the workshop
Sure.
that you're going to be up to?
That's right. So I'm teaching a weaving workshop, and I teach this one regularly here in my studio in Oxford. You would receive one of these little rainbow looms. I'm not sure if you can see if I've got one here. You will receive one of these little rainbow looms. We only have 2 hours, so it's a sort of quick and cheerful sort of taster workshop. You would also get a pack of, you get all the tools you need. So you have a couple of hanging rods and you've got snips, you've got crochet hook, you've got needles, you've got yarn. You get a yarn pack with that. And so I sell all of these as part of the Oxford Weaving Studio. So in my studio space, I'm actually two businesses. I'm a designer, but I also regularly teach workshops. So I started to accumulate lots of different yarns and materials and sell these to workshop participants. So my workshop is very much an extension of what I do as a creative, and we'll make a little woven wall hanging. So in the 2 hours, you might come away with something similar to this, and you'll learn plain weave, sumac, twill, let's say ribbed, might do some twining. There's all kinds of things that we'll learn in that workshop on Saturday.
Really exciting. We've got really lovely varied workshops, and the kickoff actually tonight, so do have a look on the website. Kind of going back to the collection, we can see lots of colour, and I know that through what you're selling, through your page, we've got some lovely merino cushions and throws. What's the kind of inspiration behind those pieces?
So the throw that I showed you earlier here is just one from a collection of forests, and that was the starting point for all my sustainable sort of trials and tribulations and working with those materials. So that collection is based around the forest and sort of tendrils of vines reaching up toward the sun. I was looking at little mini beasts and creatures and how they crawl, caterpillars, how they sort of crawl across the floor, animals that are in the forest that burrow underneath, so creating this kind of undulating earth kind of shape. So that was definitely the starting point for that collection.
When you talk about it, I can really like envisage it now by actually seeing kind of you've got that flatness, and it also looks like, yeah, correct, like burrowing and like, you know, the extra layers of the earth that would be there, but also trails. I can see that kind of, you know, more circular, that trails that some animals kind of leave
Behind.
there as well. Yeah. What is it about nature? Has that always inspired you?
In my early career, I was working with different materials. I was working with more monofilament, wire, plastics. These were all experimental sort of pieces that I did 10 years or so ago. But once I started working with the wool roving, I think nature definitely was a major inspiration. I travel quite a lot, and I'm always taking photographs of bark on a tree or ripples in the sand, or anything really that will sort of, you know, give me that imagery. And now that I really understand the material I'm working with, it's almost an immediate connection. I see something and I can already picture in my mind how I can create this on the loom and weave with it to create sort of that texture, or that, you know, emulate that sort of design that's, you know, that I see in nature.
Well, you spoke about monofilament, and we've actually got a question that's come in. So you referred to your colourful lampshade there. So it's a monofilament like fishing line, because it's close to a heat source light bulb. I'm going to say, is it safe to use? What exactly is it?
Yeah, so the lampshades are a very unique design that I come up with. That one took me over 2 years to develop how to actually get it round without sort of popping up, breaking, falling apart. The monofilament, which is that clear fishing wire, fishing line that most of you would sort of be familiar with, is incredibly difficult to work with the wool, roving especially, and it is fire retardant, the wool, but also I have a lining inside the lampshade that you have in every commercial lampshade that protects it from heat. And with LED lamps and lights these days, there is very little heat. So monofilament is safe to work with. But again, it's that, you know, working with a material that is natural, sustainable, breathable, fire retardant naturally, like the wool. It's quite a good sort of yin and yang in terms of design.
So I also know that you are supporting Handmade in Britain with our auction, and to everyone, we're running a silent auction. We've got a range of pieces, and all the proceeds go towards business development for emerging craftswomen. Now, you've actually shown the piece that you've actually kindly, you know, put forward. Can we have another look at it, because it was really interesting when, you know, when you brought it closer to the camera, because it looks like there's different materials, but is it just, you know, kind of woven merino? Tell us a little bit more.
Sure, it is mainly wool. This piece actually, because it's sort of a culmination of a year's sort of exploration into hand dyeing and hand spinning, it has quite a number of hand dyed yards. So it's predominantly hand dyed yards throughout, so you can see the color variations. It has the hand spun that I was talking about earlier today, so there's quite a number of hand spun. And this piece, West Coast, is really, I was looking at salmon migration in the west coast of Canada and water flows and how they move. So again, this piece is more like the movement of how water sort of swirls around as it meets in different junctures in a river. And the colors, again, are based on sort of salmon migration, natural colors. So you get the blues and greens of the different rivers and the different bodies of water in and around the west coast of Canada. So this piece is up for auction, so I'm really excited to share it.
Yeah, no, I've been lucky enough not to go to Canada, but to see the salmon in Scotland try and jump up. So, but even like the swirls, and now you've described it. You know, the pinks. You know, they go, oh right, of course that's salmon. The swirls, but even the rocks, but even actually the trail. If you watch a fish, you know, sometimes you get those kind of pools on top, you know, where they move through. Again, you know, it's like it's nature and it's animals moving. So again, you know, I can see the animal. I don't know what others can see, you know, let us know. But certainly for me, it's just screaming nature, you know, at us. Now, I'm going to ask a quick favor, because I absolutely adore one of the walls in your studio.
Oh.
So are we allowed to see the wall full of wool? Now, everyone, if you do it at home, do see if it all. But I'd love to have something like that. Yeah, I'm going to let everyone have a really good look.
Nope.
So what inspired you to get your wool out onto the walls?
Well, it's, I have to say, mainly practical. I had all these balls of wool on my shelves. I'll give you a quick studio tour because it's actually pretty tidy at the moment. I have a lot of my products sort of stored here on a shelf, but if you look at the back wall, that used to have all of my wool roving. And due to COVID, I actually had to move a lot of my tables around for workshops or even for letting people in, and I needed space, and they kept falling off the wall every time I walked by them. I bumped them with my hip or something because I was too close, so I had to find a way of getting them off the shelves and just presenting them. And of course, in lockdown, I was also developing my macrame and knotting techniques. I was, again, going full on with like exploring and upskilling. And so I created, of course, I'd seen lots of planter hangers, and I'm not really into that sort of thing, but they worked perfectly for my balls of work because they could expand and contract depending on the size. So if I've used a lot of one of the balls of yarn, it actually ends up being really quite, just held quite nicely.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much for the sneak peek. I absolutely love. I wish I had something like that at home, but I can tell you I won't be as tidy on there as well. So, Cassandra, we're sadly coming to the end of your live session with us, and I'd like to say a big thank you for your time with us and to go through some of your methods there. It's really lovely to see it in action. So, thank you, very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Alice. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to speak with you.